You know what? I never thought I'd be the type of person to plan revenge. I mean, I'm a UX designer for crying out loud. My whole job is about making people's lives easier, not harder. But sometimes, just sometimes, life pushes you so far that you have no choice but to push back. And when I finally did, oh boy, did I push back hard. Let me start from the beginning. I'm in my early 30s, and I've been obsessed with user experience design since college. Not just the pretty interfaces, though I love those too, but the real meat of it. The psychology behind why people click where they click, how to make technology feel like magic instead of a frustrating puzzle. I genuinely believe good design can change the world, one interaction at a time. That belief, that's what kept me at Henderson and Associates for way longer than I should have stayed. Way longer. I started there fresh out of grad school, all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, you know. The interview process was intense, 3 rounds, portfolio presentations, the whole 9 yards. Mark Henderson, the founder, sat across from me in his corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, and he painted this picture of a company that was revolutionizing digital experiences. He talked about mentorship, growth opportunities, and building something meaningful together. "We're not just another agency," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "We're craftspeople. We care about the work, not just the billable hours." I was sold hook, line, and sinker. The first few months were actually pretty great. The work was challenging, the projects were interesting, and I was learning from some genuinely talented people. There was Sarah, the senior visual designer who taught me about color theory in ways they never covered in school. There was David, this brilliant front-end developer who could make my wireframes come to life in ways that still give me chills thinking about it. But then slowly, things started to shift. It began with little things, like when I'd present a design solution in client meetings and Mark would immediately jump in with, "What is trying to say is," and then proceed to explain my own work back to me. Or when clients would email me directly with questions and Mark would insist that all communication go through him first. "It's about maintaining professional boundaries," he'd explain. "You understand." I didn't understand, but I nodded anyway. I was young, I was new, and I figured this was just how agencies worked. The real wake-up call came about 6 months in during a particularly challenging project for this fintech startup. They were trying to build a platform that would help people manage their investments, but their existing interface was a nightmare: buttons that led nowhere, forms that ate your data. The whole thing was just user hostile. I spent weeks diving deep into their user research, conducting interviews, mapping out user journeys, and designing a complete overhaul. I'm talking about a full-scale redesign here: new information architecture, streamlined workflows, a component library, the works. I was staying late, coming in on weekends, totally immersed in solving their problems. My boyfriend at the time kept joking that I was married to my laptop. "You know they're not paying you overtime, right?" he'd say as I'd work through dinner for the 3rd night in a row. "It's not about the money," I'd reply. "It's about doing good work." God, I was naive. The day of the final presentation, I was nervous but excited. I'd prepared this killer presentation: user personas, journey maps, before and after comparisons, the whole shebang. The client's entire C-suite was going to be there, and I knew we were about to blow their minds. Mark pulled me aside that morning. "I'm going to take the lead on this presentation. You've done amazing work, but I want to make sure we nail the business side of things." I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I nodded. "Okay, but I should at least present the design rationale, right? I mean, I know every decision we made and why." "We'll see how it goes," he said, patting my shoulder in this condescending way that made my skin crawl. The presentation was a disaster, not because the work was bad, the work was incredible, but because Mark didn't understand the nuances of what I'd built. He kept using buzzwords like synergy and streamlined user engagement without actually explaining the real problems we'd solved. When the client asked specific questions about the user research, he'd glance at me and say, "Can follow up with those details later." I sat there watching him butcher months of my work, and I felt something break inside me. Not just my pride, though that was definitely bruised, but my trust, my belief that we were in this together. After the meeting, the client pulled me aside. "Right, I just want to say the work you've done here is incredible. We've been struggling with these UX issues for months, and you've solved problems we didn't even know we had." I thanked him, but inside I was screaming. He saw it. The client saw what I'd accomplished, so why didn't my own boss? That's when I started paying attention to the numbers, real attention. See, Henderson and Associates had this open book policy where they'd share high-level financials with the team every quarter. It was supposed to make us feel like we were all in it together, you know? But when I started doing the math, I realized just how deep the knife was twisted. That fintech client, they were paying the agency $350 an hour for my time, $350 per hour. My salary worked out to about $18 an hour, and that's not even accounting for all the unpaid overtime I was putting in. Let me just pause here for a second and let that sink in. They were charging nearly 20 times what they were paying me, 20 times. I started tracking everything, every project, every billable hour, every client interaction. I created this spreadsheet because of course I did. I'm a UX designer and the numbers were staggering. In a typical month, I was generating around $50,000 in billable revenue for the agency. My take-home pay, less than $3,000. But here's the thing that really got to me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the respect, or the complete lack thereof. Like the time we were pitching a new client, this big e-commerce company that was looking to redesign their checkout flow. I'd spent weeks researching their current conversion rates, identifying pain points, and developing a strategy that could potentially increase their revenue by millions. Millions. The day of the pitch, I showed up in my best professional outfit, this sharp blazer I'd bought specifically for big meetings, and Mark took one look at me and said, "Maybe tone it down a bit, we don't want to seem too intense." Too intense, what did that even mean? During the pitch itself, every time I tried to speak, Mark would interrupt. "Let me jump in here," he'd say, or "what means is," and then he'd proceed to explain my own strategy back to me, but in his words with his spin. The worst part, we won the project. The client loved the approach, my approach, and we signed a six-figure contract. At the celebratory dinner, Mark raised his glass and said, "Here's to the team that made this happen." The team, not me, the team. I went home that night and cried, actually cried, found me on the couch at 2 a.m., laptop open, working on yet another project. "Jackie, what's wrong?" he asked, sitting down beside me. "I don't think they see me," I said. "I don't think they see my work as mine." "What do you mean?" I showed him the spreadsheet, the revenue numbers, the client testimonials that mentioned me by name, the presentations where my work was repackaged as our collaborative process. Was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that stuck with me. "You know what the difference is between you and Mark? You actually care about the work, he just cares about taking credit for it." That's when I started noticing the patterns. The subtle ways that Mark would diminish my contributions. The way he'd describe my skills as natural talent instead of hard-earned expertise. The way he'd question my decisions in front of clients, not because they were wrong, they were almost always right, but because he needed to establish his authority. The breaking point came during a project for this healthcare startup. They were building an app to help people manage chronic conditions, and the UX challenges were incredibly complex. How do you design for users who are dealing with pain, fatigue, and cognitive issues? How do you make medical information accessible without being overwhelming? I threw myself into the research. I interviewed patients, talked to doctors, studied accessibility guidelines, and dove deep into the psychology of health behavior change. I was developing this framework not just for this project, but a comprehensive approach to designing for healthcare that could be applied to any medical application. I called it the Adaptive Care Framework. It was based on three core principles: progressive disclosure of information, flexible interaction patterns that adapted to the user's current state, and empathetic error handling that never made users feel stupid or broken. The work was groundbreaking. I'm not being modest here, it was genuinely innovative stuff. I was working 12-hour days, documenting everything, creating templates and components that could be reused across projects. I was building something that could help millions of people manage their health more effectively. The client presentation was scheduled for a Thursday. On Wednesday, I was putting the finishing touches on my slides when I overheard Mark on a call in his office. The door was slightly open and his voice carried. "Yeah, we've developed this proprietary framework for healthcare UX," he was saying. "It's going to be a game changer. We're thinking about licensing it to other agencies." I froze. Proprietary framework, we licensing. I kept listening. The beauty of it is that it's completely scalable. We can apply these principles to any healthcare application. It's intellectual property that could be worth millions. My heart was pounding. He was talking about my framework, my research, my late nights, my insights, and he was talking about it like it was his. I quietly walked back to my desk and sat down. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about user flows or wireframes. I was thinking about justice. That night, I called my friend Lisa, who's a lawyer specializing in intellectual property. We'd gone to college together, and she'd always been the one to call out bullshit when she saw it. Lisa, I need to ask you something hypothetical, I said. Oh, what did you do? I didn't do anything yet, but I might. I explained the situation, the framework I'd developed, the fact that I'd done all the research and documentation on my own time using my own resources, the way Mark was positioning it as company IP. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Jackie, do you have everything documented? All your research, your process, your iterations? Every single step. I'm obsessive about documentation. Good, because technically, if you developed this framework outside of work hours, using your own resources, and it's not explicitly covered in your employment contract, it could be considered your intellectual property. My heart started racing, really. Really? But Jackie, you need to be careful here. If you're thinking about doing what I think you're thinking about doing, you need to make sure you're completely in the right, legally speaking. I spent the next few days diving into my employment contract, my documentation, and the legal implications of what I was considering. The more I researched, the more confident I became. The framework was mine. Every insight, every principle, every template, it was all my work. But I didn't want to just prove that it was mine. I wanted to make sure that no one could ever profit from my work without my permission again. The idea came to me on a Saturday morning. I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, working on some personal projects, when I overheard two developers talking about open source libraries. The beauty of open source, one of them was saying, is that once it's out there, it belongs to everyone. No one can take it and claim it as their own proprietary solution. Open source, of course. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing. I refined the framework, created comprehensive documentation, and built example implementations. I researched different open source licenses and settled on the MIT license. It would allow anyone to use, modify, and distribute the framework, but they'd have to credit the original author, me. I also started reaching out to my network, quietly, professionally. I contacted some of the clients I'd worked with, the ones who'd specifically praised my work. I didn't pitch them anything, I just reconnected, shared some insights, and let them know I was thinking about doing some independent consulting. The response was overwhelming. 3 different companies immediately asked if I'd be interested in consulting work. One of them was the fintech startup. They wanted to expand on the work I'd done for them, and they specifically requested that I be the one to lead the project. We've worked with several agencies since then, the CEO told me, but nobody really understood our users the way you did. I was starting to realize something. The clients weren't loyal to Henderson and Associates. They were loyal to the work, my work. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in October, I did it. I uploaded the adaptive care framework to GitHub, complete with documentation, examples, and implementation guides. I chose a simple, professional description, a comprehensive framework for designing healthcare applications that prioritize user empathy and accessibility. I didn't announce it, I didn't post about it on social media, I just put it out there and waited. The response was almost immediate. Within days, developers and designers were sharing the repository, forking it, and starting to use it in their own projects. Healthcare startups were implementing it, accessibility advocates were sharing it, design blogs were writing about it. And then the phone calls started. The first call came from the healthcare startup we'd been working with. We've been following your framework online, and we're incredibly impressed. We're wondering if you'd be interested in consulting directly with us on our next phase of development. Then the fintech company, then 2 other clients from previous projects, then companies I'd never worked with before who'd found the framework and wanted to work with its creator. Within 2 weeks, I had more consulting inquiries than I could handle, and every single one of them was offering rates that were significantly higher than what Henderson and Associates was paying me. Mark, of course, was completely oblivious. He was still planning to present our framework to the healthcare client, still talking about licensing opportunities, still treating me like I was just there to execute his vision. The Thursday presentation arrived. I showed up early, set up my laptop, and waited. Mark walked in 15 minutes late, looking flustered. I've been reviewing your slides, and I think we need to adjust the messaging a bit. We want to really emphasize that this is part of Henderson and Associates' broader strategic approach. I looked at him calmly. Actually, Mark, I think there might be some confusion about the framework. What do you mean? I pulled up GitHub on my laptop and turned the screen toward him. The adaptive care framework is actually open source. It's available for anyone to use free of charge. The color drained from his face. What are you talking about? I developed the framework on my own time, using my own resources. I've decided to make it available to the entire design community. Mark stared at the screen, scrolling through the repository, reading the documentation, seeing the stars and forks and comments from other designers. This is company intellectual property, you can't just. Actually, I can. I've checked with a lawyer. The framework is entirely my work, developed outside of work hours. It's completely legal. The client meeting was awkward to say the least. Mark tried to pivot, tried to position the agency as the strategic partner who could help implement the open source framework, but the client wasn't buying it. Actually, the client said, we're more interested in working directly with. We've been following her work online and we're impressed by her thought leadership in healthcare UX. After the meeting, Mark pulled me into his office. He was trying to play it cool, but I could see the panic in his eyes. Let's talk about this framework situation. I think there might be some misunderstanding about ownership, but I'm sure we can work something out. Maybe a partnership arrangement, 50-50 split on any licensing revenue. I almost laughed, 50-50, after years of being paid a fraction of what I was worth. Mark, the framework is open source. There's no licensing revenue to split. But if you're interested in my consulting services, I'm happy to discuss that. My rate is $200 an hour. His jaw dropped. $200 an hour? Let's be realistic here. You're talented, but you're not a senior consultant yet. Actually, I am as of today. I handed him my resignation letter. The next few months were a whirlwind. I officially launched my consulting practice, working with the clients who'd reached out to me directly. The adaptive care framework continued to gain traction in the design community. It was featured in design blogs, presented at conferences, and implemented by dozens of companies. But the real satisfaction came from the work itself. For the first time in years, I was working with clients who valued my expertise, who trusted my judgment, and who paid me what I was worth. I wasn't just executing someone else's vision. I was leading projects, making strategic decisions, and seeing my work make a real impact. The healthcare startup I'd consulted with launched their app 6 months later. It was featured in the App Store as one of the best health apps of the year. The fintech company saw a 40% increase in conversion rates after implementing my redesigned checkout flow. Another client, an education platform, reported that their user engagement increased by 300% after we redesigned their onboarding experience. These weren't just statistics to me. They were real people having better experiences with technology. They were patients managing their conditions more effectively. They were small business owners completing financial transactions without frustration. They were students learning more efficiently. This was why I'd gotten into UX design in the first place. As for Henderson and Associates, well, let's just say things didn't go so well for them. They lost 3 major clients within 6 months, all of whom came to work with me directly. Mark tried to hire other designers to replace me, but the clients weren't interested in working with anyone else. I heard through the grapevine that he'd tried to claim credit for the adaptive care framework at a conference, but someone in the audience called him out on it. Isn't that's framework? The one that's open source on GitHub. The design community is smaller than you might think. Word gets around. About a year after I left, Mark reached out. He wanted to meet for coffee. I was curious, so I agreed. He looked older, more tired. The confident swagger was gone. I wanted to apologize, he said. I think I made some mistakes in how I managed things. I waited for him to continue. The truth is, I was threatened by your talent. You were better at the work than I was, and instead of supporting that, I tried to contain it. I'm sorry. It was the first time he'd ever acknowledged my work as mine. Part of me wanted to be angry. Why did it take losing everything for him to see what had been obvious all along? But mostly, I just felt sad for him. I appreciate the apology, Mark, but I'm not sure what you want me to say. I was wondering, would you consider coming back as a partner, equal equity, equal say in the business? I looked at him across the table, this man who'd spent years diminishing my contributions, and I felt nothing but pity. Mark, I'm happy where I am. I'm working with clients who respect my expertise from day one. I don't need to prove myself anymore. A year and a half later, I'm running a successful consulting practice with a team of 3 other designers. We work with companies that are building products that actually matter, healthcare apps, educational platforms, financial tools that help people build wealth instead of just managing debt. The adaptive care framework has been downloaded over 50,000 times and implemented by companies around the world. I get emails from designers thanking me for sharing it, from patients who used apps built with the framework, from developers who used it to create more accessible healthcare tools. But you know what the best part is? I'm not bitter anymore, I'm not angry, I'm just satisfied. I learned something important through all of this. Your work will speak for itself, but only if you let it. For too long, I let other people speak for my work, let them repackage it and take credit for it. But when I finally stepped forward and claimed ownership of what I'd created, everything changed. Not just professionally, but personally. I stopped seeking validation from people who were never going to give it to me. I stopped trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I wasn't worth much. Instead, I found my own clients, my own voice, and my own definition of success. The revenge, it wasn't really revenge at all. It was just finally getting the respect I'd always deserved. And you know what? That feels pretty damn good. Sometimes I still run into market industry events. He's polite, professional. His agency is struggling, they've had to lay off half their staff, and they're mostly working with smaller clients now. But I don't take pleasure in that, I'm too busy building something better. The design community is full of talented people who are undervalued, underpaid, and underappreciated. If my story can inspire even one of them to stand up for their worth, to claim ownership of their work, to demand the respect they deserve, then all of those late nights, all of that frustration, all of that anger was worth it. Because at the end of the day, it's not about getting revenge on the people who wronged you. It's about building something better, something that reflects your true value, something that makes the world a little bit better than it was before. And that's the kind of user experience I'm proud to design.